When Prince Charles left for a trip a month before his wedding to Diana, photographers caught her crying at the airport as he bade her farewell. But there's an even more heartbreaking side to the iconic footage. Princess Diana was open about her struggles with mental health, and eventually she sought the help of multiple therapists. While most of us will never go through the intense scrutiny and pressure of marrying into a royal family, mental health affects all of us in different ways, and starting therapy can be daunting. BetterHelp is the sponsor of this video, and they make it simpler than ever to get connected to a licensed therapist who is trained to listen and give you helpful, unbiased advice. Click the link in the description or visit betterhelp.com/factinate to get 10% off your first month of therapy. With BetterHelp, you can have your therapy sessions as a phone call, a video chat, or even via messaging, whatever's most comfortable for you. You fill out a questionnaire to assess your specific needs, and then you'll be matched with your therapist within 48 hours in most cases. If the therapist you're first matched with doesn't feel like the right fit, which can be common when starting therapy, you can easily switch to a new one at no additional cost. If you think you might benefit from therapy, consider BetterHelp. Click the link in the description or visit betterhelp.com/factinate to support this channel and get 10% off your first month, and join over 4 million people who have used BetterHelp to start living a healthier, happier life. Diana Spencer eventually occupied the ultra-stressful position of wife of the heir to the British throne. But it's not like she had a peaceful life before that. As a child, her parents had a tumultuous relationship, and when they eventually separated, a bitter custody battle followed that ended with Diana and her younger brother only being allowed to see their mother on weekends. Her father got remarried to the Countess of Dartmouth, whom Diana and her siblings hated. In 1978, her father suffered a brain hemorrhage, and her new stepmother blocked the children from seeing him in hospital. He eventually recovered, but this episode added fuel to the fire between the siblings and their stepmother. The misery at home didn't exactly drive Diana to apply herself at school, and after failing her exams twice, she dropped out at 16. Diana's parents forbade her from getting an apartment or moving to London until she was 18. So, she came up with a plan to break free of her dysfunctional family home. She became a nanny to a family in Hampshire, and after 2 long years, finally made it to London. While there, she lived in a house with 3 other girls and took on a series of low-paying jobs, including teaching dance and even some cleaning work. It was one of the happiest times of her life. But back home, the rest of her family were looking toward loftier pursuits. When she wasn't away at school, Diana grew up on the Sandringham estate in Norfolk. Her family leased the house from its owner, Queen Elizabeth II. The Queen and her family frequently holidayed nearby at Sandringham House and were close with the Spencers. Diana even called the Queen Aunt Lilibet. When Diana went back to Althorp to visit family, she found her sister Sarah entertaining an unexpected guest, Prince Charles, the elder brother of Diana's childhood playmates Andrew and Edward. Her sister Sarah had a huge crush on Charles, but Diana herself didn't have the best first impression of him. That said, Diana could tell that Charles liked her, and despite her initial opinion, she was flattered. By the time Diana was 19, Sarah had taken the hint that Charles wasn't interested in her, and when Diana met him again at a mutual friend's house one weekend, Charles made his move. As Diana put it, he practically jumped on her. She resisted his advances this time, but agreed to go with him on an upcoming sailing trip. Then it was a weekend in Balmoral, his family's castle. When Charles wanted her to spend time with him, it flattered and excited her, but it quickly became clear that she was in way over her head. She'd never had a boyfriend before, and didn't know what was normal. Throughout their courtship, Diana leaned on her loyal flatmates for guidance, as well as a handful of girls she'd met through Charles. And she was getting most of her advice from an unexpected source. Charles' friend, Camilla Parker Bowles, always had a lot to say to Diana about the prince's behaviour. But it took her a while to realise just why Camilla was such an expert source. The next time Diana went to see Charles, he asked her to marry him. But it wasn't exactly the romantic moment you'd expect. Despite the sentimental words coming out of Charles' mouth, there was no love behind his eyes or affection in his gestures. He even gave himself away with one unsettling sentence, saying he loved her, whatever love means. Diana knew that something was off, but she was simply too young and naive to recognise the giant red flags in front of her. The absurdity of the situation, her brief romance with Charles, their age difference, and the fact that she could one day become the Queen of England left Diana stunned and overwhelmed. She accepted his proposal, but she was once again struck with a strange feeling. Diana said she knew, even then, that she'd never become queen. As soon as the press realised that Diana was in Charles's life, they descended on her like vultures. Yet few people realised just how bad it was. While avoiding the constant barrage of press, Diana began to learn how to avoid them. But one of her methods was not only dangerous, it also foreshadowed her tragic final moments. She was still a new driver, but Diana realised that one of the most effective ways of getting paparazzi off her back was to speed through a green light at the last second, leaving them in her dust. Charles and Diana's first appearance as an engaged couple was at a charity ball at Goldsmiths Hall, where she met another iconic princess, Grace of Monaco. Keeping track of all the social rules overwhelmed Diana, and Grace sensed it. She pulled Diana aside and offered a grave warning. For both women, those words would hold a sense of foreboding. Living in Buckingham Palace during the engagement brought Diana closer to Charles, but not in the way she wanted. In fact, their proximity set her up for a devastating bombshell. Once, she overheard him on the phone telling Camilla, "Whatever happens, I will always love you." The wedding approached, and for Diana, there was no turning back. That week, she began binge eating and purging as a way to deal with the stress and pressure. Sadly, this wouldn't be her last time battling bulimia. On July 29th, 1981, Diana Spencer walked down the aisle at St Paul's Cathedral to face Charles, Prince of Wales. She said her vows in front of an audience of 3,500 guests, with 2 million spectators waiting outside to greet the couple and an estimated 750 million watching at home. As she walked up the aisle, Diana forgot the fear and apprehension that had overwhelmed her in the lead up to the wedding, and focused solely on how in love she was, even with the knowledge that Camilla was sitting right there in the church watching them. She convinced herself that happily ever after was on the horizon. Sadly, it was all an illusion, and during their honeymoon, it came crashing down. For the first 3 months of their marriage, Diana became obsessed with Camilla and dreamed about her every night. She finally found some reprieve when she got pregnant in October of 1981. The pregnancy wasn't easy on her, and it ravaged her already fragile body. Just a few months in, she suffered a horrible fall down some stairs. Luckily, she was okay, but there was a dark truth about this accident. Years later, Diana confessed that she'd purposely thrown herself down the stairs that day after a fight with Charles. And his reaction was brutal. He didn't appear worried at all, and he completely dismissed Diana. Her cries for help were falling on deaf ears. Prince William was born healthy and happy in June of 1982, but Diana's bliss as a new mother was cut short by postpartum depression and the growing divide between herself and her in-laws. In 1984, Diana was pregnant once again, and this time everything was different. She wasn't as sick, and in the final months of her pregnancy, Diana and Charles were closer than they'd ever been. The final 6 weeks of Diana's pregnancy marked the high point of her marriage. But when Prince Harry was born, Charles retreated from Diana once more. He was hoping for a baby girl and expressed his disappointment to the Queen, who snapped back that he should be happy to have a healthy child. Princess Diana and Queen Elizabeth didn't get along per se, but according to Diana, there was a form of mutual respect between the two. Unfortunately, the Queen attributed all of their marital problems to Diana's bulimia and claimed that it was the source of Charles's issues. Diana and Charles's fights got worse, and when he would refuse to acknowledge her, she would turn to self-harm. Charles would either ignore her or tell her that she was crying wolf. It was 5 years into their marriage, and Diana was living on tenterhooks. Finally, she was driven over the edge. When she found out that Charles and Camilla were having a full-on affair, she decided that two can play at that game. Her attention fell on James Hewitt, her riding instructor. Diana and Hewitt's romance went from fling to long-term affair. After a skiing trip with Prince Andrew and his wife Sarah Ferguson tragically ended with the death of one of their friends in an avalanche, Diana fell back into her old habits, binging and purging, until finally a friend called and gave her an ultimatum: get treatment or they'd tell the world about her eating disorder. Seeing a doctor and dealing with her condition replenished Diana and gave her the strength to stand up to her husband and Camilla. At a party for Camilla's sister's birthday, Diana entered the room where Charles and Camilla were talking and told Charles to leave. Then she finally confronted the woman who'd haunted her for the past 10 years. Diana was calm as she sat down in front of Camilla and told her that she knew exactly what was happening between her and her husband. And while it did little to stem Charles and Camilla's affair, it was a massive weight off Diana's shoulders. Bulimia had served to isolate Diana from everyone around her. When she came out of it, she finally was able to make connections and became the woman that everyone began to call the People's Princess. She began to spend her time talking with people, be it on the street or in a cancer ward, and listening to their stories. And in the process, she changed herself and the world around her. Diana was one of very few public figures to stand up for AIDS victims early in the epidemic. Though most people were afraid of touching people with HIV and AIDS, Diana knew better. In a famous incident, the princess not only shook hands with an ill man, but also hugged him. In a heartbreaking speech, she said that HIV doesn't make people dangerous to know. You can shake their hands and give them a hug. Heaven knows they need it. It was a groundbreaking moment. In March of '92, Princess Diana lost her father, John Spencer. Upon his death, her brother Charles became the 9th Earl Spencer and received the family home at Althorpe. Just 2 days after the loss of their father, Charles and Diana tossed their stepmother out of their house, even kicking the bags down the stairs towards her. That year, Diana finally decided to expose the truth about her life as the Princess of Wales. In June, the Sunday Times began publishing passages from the book Diana, Her True Story, with headlines like "Diana driven to 5 suicide bids by uncaring Charles." Diana had never expected to get out of her marriage to Charles, but the separation of Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson the year before had shown her that there was indeed a way out. After just over a decade of marriage, Princess Diana and Prince Charles officially separated. Shortly after the passages from Diana's book were published, a tape recording was leaked to the press that implied Diana was having an affair with childhood friend James Gilby. In the tape, she expressed fear that she was pregnant, and he called her darling and squidgy. So, tabloid reporters working for the world's least flushable toilet paper, The Sun, obviously dubbed the incident Squidgygate. Genius. The firestorm of controversy was stiflingly intense, and behind the scenes, both Diana's and Charles' staffers waged a secret PR war, hoping to gain public sympathy. Diana fought back in the form of a tell-all interview with Martin Bashir. After everything they'd gone through, it was the final straw. In December of 1995, the Queen wrote a letter to both Diana and Charles asking that they divorce. When the courts finalised Diana's divorce from Charles, she expected to return to her family home of Althorpe. However, she was in for a devastating surprise. Her brother refused to let her live there. leaving Diana heartbroken. Instead, she lived the rest of her life in a set of apartments in Kensington Palace. Still, not too shabby. After her divorce, Diana dated British-Pakistani heart surgeon Hasnat Khan, and this wasn't just a simple rebound. She was madly in love with him, but her circumstances presented a host of problems for the budding romance. Khan knew that the media attention would completely take over and ruin their lives, and Diana's butler reported that her mother disapproved of her being in a relationship with a Muslim man. Ultimately, the pair split up in the summer of '97 after nearly 2 years of dating. Later, friends shared that they considered Khan the love of Diana's life. But even if that's true, she did rebound from him quite quickly. Diana took her sons for a summer vacation in '97 to the south of France, where they were guests of Egyptian billionaire Mohammed Al Fayed. While on the trip, she met his son Dodi, and they began seeing each other after the trip ended. When the press realised that Diana had a boyfriend, they went into overdrive, following them around France. To avoid them, Diana and Dodi changed their dinner reservations and even sent out a decoy car to give them some cover. But all their planning couldn't prevent the tragedy that loomed ahead. After the decoy left the Paris Ritz, the hotel's head of security, Henri Paul, got behind the wheel of a Mercedes to secretly shuttle them to Dodi's apartment. They never made it there.
This is BBC One. We've interrupted our programmes for a news report.
This is BBC Television from London. Diana, Princess of Wales, has died after a car crash in Paris.
So an unconfirmed source from the Press Association
that Diana, Princess of Wales, has died.
The car carrying Diana, Dodi, Henri Paul and Trevor Rhys-Jones, a member of the Fayed family's security team, approached the Pont de l'Alma tunnel. A number of motorcycles carrying photographers swarmed the car. The car crashed in the tunnel, bouncing between walls and pillars before coming to a stop. While some of the photographers who'd been chasing them rushed to help, others took pictures. Both Rhys-Jones and Diana were conscious when ambulances arrived 15 minutes after the crash. Soon after EMTs took her out of the car, she went into cardiac arrest. They managed to revive her, but about 3 hours after she arrived at the hospital, she was pronounced dead. As Prince Charles and her sisters rushed to France, mourners left more than 1 million bouquets outside the gates of Kensington Palace. After he initially received the news from France, Prince Charles had to wake William and Harry before dawn to break the news to them about their mother. While the royal family expressed their grief, they were criticised for remaining tight-lipped about the tragedy, a reaction they later explained was part of an effort to protect William and Harry's privacy. Following Diana's death, a number of investigations began looking into the causes of the crash. Speed and the presence of paparazzi were factors, but there was one surprise. The driver of the car, Henri Paul, had both alcohol and prescription medication in his system. After her death, one of Diana's staff stated that he'd come to the conclusion that the upper echelons of the royal family, or the firm as Diana called them, had leaked the Squidgygate tape to embarrass her, but that was far from the most disturbing allegation against them. Diana lived in fear of the firm, expressing her suspicions that they were going to take her out multiple times, and it all stemmed back to one incident years before. In the early 90s, Diana was recorded by her voice coach saying that between 1984 and 1986, she was deeply in love with another man. In '86, Diana's security team made the decision to transfer her bodyguard, Barry Manicky, to another detail. His managers had determined that his relationship with the princess was inappropriate, leading to speculation years down the line that he had been the man Diana had been referring to. About a year after that, Maneki died in a car crash. Immediately, Diana had her suspicions. While an investigation found that it had been an accident, Diana continued to believe for years that the firm had been involved in her alleged former lover's death. A month before his wedding to Diana, Charles left for a trip. At the airport that day, photographers caught Diana crying as he bade her farewell. But there's an even more heartbreaking side to that iconic photograph.
That was nothing to do with him going. The most awful thing had happened before he went. I was in his study talking to him about his trip. The telephone rang, it was Camilla. So I thought, shall I be nice or shall I just sit here? So I thought I'd be nice, so I left them to it. And it just broke my heart.
If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe for more videos.